Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifey Technologies YouTube channel, and thank you so much for watching and supporting our channel. So this is another episode of our Nokia Lab simulation series. Remember, in this series we discuss how to implement different networking protocols or different networking technologies on Nokia routing and switching devices. So if you're interested to understand or to learn how to configure, how to manage, how to troubleshoot different networking protocols on Nokia routing and switching devices, kindly check out this series. We have already published a couple of videos on this series, so check it out on our channel and stay tuned for more upcoming videos. Again, just a reminder that if you are watching this video and you are yet to subscribe to our channel, kindly support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, comment on this video, also share with your network. So in this episode, we'll be focusing on how to configure IPv6 addresses on Nokia routing devices. We know that IPv6 has been there for some time, and we have been talking about depletion of IPv4 addresses for years. But for the recent years, many service provider networks have been migrated to IPv6, and many others are planning to migrate to IPv6. Service providers are now running either they are doing dual stack, configuring both IPv4 and IPv6, or some of them they have already begun migrating purely to IPv6 addressing that is. So as a network engineer, it's good to understand how to configure IPv6 addresses, how to manage the network running IPv6, and how to implement different protocols on a network that is configured with IPv6 addresses. So in this series, we'll be doing a basic lab on how to configure IPv6 addresses on Nokia routing devices. So to start us with, this is the topology that we are using. You can see that we have three routers. We have R1, R2, and R3. And we have assigned IPv6 addresses for the loopback interface and also for the point-to-point connection between different routers. So this is the topology that we'll be using, just a simple topology to illustrate how you can configure IPv6 addresses on Nokia routing devices. So for the point-to-point, we are using /127. This is the point-to-point, similar to /31 on IPv4. So we'll be using /127 for the point-to-point connection and 128, which is /32, which is similar to /32 on the IPv4 side. So to start us with, let's verify the connections on this router. So if I run show system LLDP neighbor, you can see that this router has one connection to R2. On R2, we expect to have two connections. Show system LLDP neighbor, we have two connections to R1 and R3. And finally, on R3, show system LLDP neighbor, we have one connection to router R2 on interface C1. So the first thing that we need to do is to configure the interfaces. So we need to configure an interface bind the port that is connecting the different routers, and we also be configuring the IPv6 addressing on the interfaces. So for IPv4, we have done multiple labs demonstrating how you can configure IPv4 addresses. You can check them on our channel. And then we also need to configure IPv6 address for our system interface, which we are referring to the loopback as the loopback interface in this lab. So on R1, if I run show router interface, this is how you check the interfaces that are configured. You can see that yes, we have the system interface. The admin state is up, but the operation state, both V4 and V6, is down. On R2, we expect similar output. Show router interface. We don't have any interface addresses configured. Shows router interface. On R3, we also don't have any IPv6 addresses configured. So to start the configuration, we'll start by configuring the system interface. So we need to configure router interface system, and then you can use a question mark. You can see that if you use the question mark, it will give you the available options. So you can see that we can do IPv6, which enables or configures IPv6 for an address. So this is the first thing that we need to do. We need to enable IPv6 addressing on the interface. same way we have been doing on Huawei. It's the same implementation that we are doing on Nokia. So if you run show, you see that we don't. Just exit again, configure router interface system. You are using info. So when you run info, you see that the only thing that we have is no shutdown. So the first thing we'll do is to enable IPv6 using the IPv6 command. And then we can now do an address. So we can assign the address of 2001 colon AA colon BB colon 1, mask is 128. Info, you have the configuration details. Let me exit and do info again. So you can see that the first thing that we are doing is to enable IPv6, and once you have enabled IPv6, we can now go ahead and assign an IPv6 address on this interface. So this is it for this system interface. We can now configure the point-to-point interface from R1 to R2. So I will configure router interface. We say to R2. And then show, we need to use info. So when we run the info, we don't have any other configuration apart from enabling the interface. So the next thing that we need to do is to bind the port, but we can also give it a description just to R2. And again, show system LLDP neighbor, you have that interface. So I can run port, this is the port that is connecting to R2. Once we have configured the port, we can now enable IPv6. So same way we need to enable IPv6, and then we give it an address of 2001 colon 4, mask is 127. You can also use the AUI, but in this setup, we'll just be doing the basic configuration. We are not using the AUI 64 format. So if you do info, exit info, you can see that we have the IPv6 address assigned. Next thing that we need to do is to configure our R2. So we'll start by configuring the system interface. So configure router interface system. Then we need to enable IPv6 and assign address of 2001 colon AA colon BB colon 2, mask is 128, info, that is it, exit info. So you have your IPv6 address assigned on the system interface. We'll again configure router info just to see the configuration that we have. So we'll create two interfaces, one to R1 and another one to R3. So interface to R1, description, we say it's to R1. And then we need to bind the port. Again, show system LLDP neighbor. We need to bind the port of C1. Info. So you have the description, you have the port, we have enabled the interface. So the last part is now to enable IPv6 addressing. So IPv6, then we give it address of 2001 colon 5, it's 127. Info, you have it there, exit info. So we have configured interface to R1. We run info again. You can see that we have the interface to R1 configured. I will configure the next interface, which is to R3. Description to R3. And then we need to bind the port. The port will be C2. Info, and then finally we need to assign an address. So we use IPv6 address. This is 2001 colon 2, mask is 127. Info, you have your interface configurations, exit info just to verify the configuration. So we have the interface to R1, we have the interface to R3. So if I show router interface, we expect to have the 3 interfaces with the IPv6. You can see that we also have the link local IP addresses assigned on this interface. So there are different types of IPv6 addresses, and many times when you enable IPv6, all the links will have the link local address. So these are the link local addresses that have been assigned on interface to R1 and interface to R3. So you can see that the IPv6 status is up, the version 4 is down because we haven't assigned any IPv4 addresses on these interfaces. And finally, we'll move to R3, configure router, then interface system. I will do IPv6. You can configure it in one line, address, and then this is 200:AA:BB:3. Mask is 128. Info, you have your system configurations. Then interface to R2. Description to R2. And then we can assign the port. So let me show system LLDP neighbor. You have the port here, so I will copy the port again. This is the port, info, and finally we'll do IPv6 address. This is 2001::3. Mask is 127. Info, show router interface. You have the one interface. You can see that this interface has the link local address, which is always generated from the MAC address of that interface. So we have finished configuring the interfaces. Show router interface again. On R2, you have the interfaces. So the next thing that we can do is also to see how can you ping IPv6 on Nokia routers. So you can see that if you use ping command and see the parameter that you have, you can see that you can ping IPv6 address or you can ping the IPv4 address. So let's try to ping the IPv6 address. Let me first show router interface, then ping, try to ping the point to point. Let's start by trying to ping the system interface. So you can see that we are able to ping. So this is slightly different with Huawei. When you are pinging on Huawei, you have to specifically say that it's ping IPv6. But on Nokia, you can see that we are able to ping without specifying it's an IPv6 address. So show router interface again, and we try to ping the point to point, ping the point to point. So this should be .4. You can see that we are able to ping. Then on R3 we have .3. We are able to ping. If I show router ARP, show router ARP, we don't have it. Show router interface. Let's see, show router just run ARP, show ARP, and see whether we have that option. We don't have it. For the option that we have under the router, we have service name, we have So when we run for do we have IPv6 ARP, just to verify that we have show router. So I will check on this how you can display the ARP for IPv6 routing. But you can see that from our configurations, you have been able to configure the IPv6 addressing on this router. The first thing that you need to do is to enable IPv6, and then assign the address. So you first enable on the interface and then assign the address. And you can do the same for all the other interfaces, even the system interface. You also need to assign to enable the IPv6 first and then assign the IP address. So on R1, we can also verify the configurations, info, exit, then configure router, info. So you have the two interfaces to R2, the IP address has been assigned to R3, to the system interface, IP address as assigned. We can ping the point to point between the two routers, .5. It's two colons. So you can see that we are able to ping from R1 to R2, and similarly we should be able to ping from R3 to, sorry for that, ping 2::1. This one should be .2. So we are able to ping from R3 to R2. So this is how simple it is to configure IPv6 addressing on Nokia routing devices. Again, you just need to enable the IPv6 addressing on the interface, and then you can go ahead and assign the IP address on the interface that you want to. And then you can also do the ping, you can trace. So in upcoming videos, we'll be demonstrating how to implement dynamic routing for IPv6 so that you are able to implement protocols like OSPF, ISIS for IPv6 dynamic routing. Thank you again for watching this episode, and if you have enjoyed it, kindly leave a comment in our comment section, like this video, and also share with your network. And again, please remember to subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for more upcoming videos. Bye.